Hey guys, this is Billy from AdultCello.com. We recently hit 20,000 subscribers, and to celebrate, I put out a call to questions. So now I'm going to answer your questions one by one. I received a lot, so it's going to be a two-part series, and keep in mind, one of you who submitted a question is going to win a 60-minute Zoom lesson with me, and that will be announced at the end of the second session. Okay, so let's just dive right in. All right, so this first question is from Michelle Lima 1. Hi Billy, I've been learning the cello for 2 months now. Is it normal to feel like you're stuck or even regressing? I've been playing every day. Some days feel easy, some days feel like I am playing bad or that I can't find the right position and it frustrates me. Okay, hey Michelle, that is absolutely normal. In terms of feeling stuck or regressing, I would say if you're feeling like that kind of feeling over a period of weeks or like, a week in a row, 2 weeks in a row, maybe you have to think about, if you're studying with someone privately, maybe you guys need to take a different tack. If it's only been 2 months and you just feel like you're getting nowhere at all for weeks on end, that to me is a little bit of a red flag that something needs to change. But I completely remember being in your shoes when I started, and sometimes I would sit down and I swear I had the same chair. I would even try to measure the end pin to some degree to get it perfectly so everything's the exact same as I left it the day before. And I remember just feeling like, have I ever held this thing before? It just felt completely foreign, and then my left hand would just be off by God knows how much, and it's very normal for the cello to just be like a total up and down roller coaster in the beginning 6 months. I would say that I would totally expect to have good days and bad days. Okay, so I'm sure you're doing fine. You're on the right track. It's very frustrating. I totally agree with you, but it is worth the effort of just pushing through that initial phase. And I do promise you that if you stick with it, over time, these things will come to feel like second nature. I remember one of my early teachers telling me that the bow hold was going to eventually feel completely natural for me. And I looked at him like, you've got to be kidding me. I'll learn how to do this because I'm not going to stop until I can, but this will never feel natural. And I swear, it feels completely natural now. Okay, so best of luck on your cello journey, and yeah, enjoy it and just push. All right, this question is from the one with the rat PFP. I hope I said that right. What are your biggest tips for memorizing pieces? That's a great question. I've had not, I'll admit that even starting as an adult, I haven't really had huge issues memorizing pieces. Like when I played sonatas or, concerto movements, stuff like that, I tend to be pretty good at memorizing. A couple things I try to do. First off is one of the things that started me in music and the cello was my fascination with classical music. And so along with learning how to play the cello, I went back to school and I studied as much as I could on the side. I was studying counterpoint and theory, and I think my understanding of music theory really helped me with memorization, because if you know kind of, let's say you're playing a melody and you kind of understand the chord structure, and it gives you sort of like a skeletal backbone for the entire piece. And then, the melody and the music, whoever else is playing, it's kind of like the flesh and blood that makes it come to life. But to have a skeletal backbone or like a roadmap in terms of the music theory makes it very easy to understand, not just like, oh, there's a B flat all of a sudden now. It's like, oh, no. Okay, now we're in F major. That's why there's a B flat. So I should expect B flats to come, so that kind of backbone is very, very helpful. Okay, the other thing I did that was equally helpful is when I was learning pieces, especially sonatas and concertos, I would find my favorite recordings and I'd listen to them a lot and kind of sing along mentally. And then if you can get to the point where you can, if you're saying learning a sonata, you can hear the piano part in your mind and how that goes. And then you can use a form of mental practice where you're basically hearing the piano part and then, as much as possible, playing along the cello part, and even in your mind's eye, visualizing either your left hand or what the bow feels like, but as much as possible, getting like a 3D recreation of what it would be like to play it. That really solidifies your ability to memorize. So it's a difficult task, and I've gotten better at it as I've gone along, but that was one thing that I would do. And one thing, another hint I would give is that when I do it on my own, I don't force myself to try to play through it in my mind at the speed, like the full tempo of the piece. I would just go ahead and do it a little bit slower, but really try to picture the shifts, the string crossings, like everything in as much detail as possible, and start at the start of the piece and get all the way to the end of the movement, or the end of, from the start to the end, straight through, even if it's really slow. That to me, again, helps kind of create like a backbone, a highway, whatever you want to call it, but it creates a really clear-cut path, and so it's easier to memorize. All right, this is from Janet Bailey 7771. How can we practice efficiently? Congrats on 20K, Billy. Thank you so much, Janet. So, practice efficiently. Okay, that's like a very big topic, a very important topic for adult learners too. So I'm just going to give a couple thoughts here. On a macro scale, I think in terms of efficiency, the biggest thing you can do is figure out what it is that's currently kind of holding you back in your cello journey, and start attacking that area assiduously in your practice with a game plan. So in my cello journey, I had times where, for example, I was working really hard on vibrato because I really wanted a vibrato. It's about time. It's going to make everything so much better. And if I had done more work on my bow hold, my bow hand, my bow arm, to improve my bowing first, that would have facilitated my work that I wanted to do with the left hand on vibrato. And because I kind of did things at times, just naturally, I sort of did things a little out of order, looking back, I did make progress on my vibrato, but it wasn't like the kind of progress I would have dreamed of. So part of it is, if you can, a little bit, it's that people talk about that 80-20 principle, but if you can find the one or two things that are really gonna hit you to the next level and work on that at the right time, that's huge. Now, on a micro level, I would say for efficient practice, a lot of people benefit from scheduling it out. Okay, so let's say you have 45 minutes to an hour for the day. You might say, okay, I'm gonna do 5 minutes of scales. Well, let's say I'll start with the open bows for a few minutes to build tone, and then I'm gonna do scale, and then I'll do an arpeggio pattern, and then I'll do an etude I'm working on, and then I'll do a piece. But you pick exactly how many minutes, and then within those time periods, okay, not just the piece I'm working on, what part of the piece? What's the problem I'm gonna try and solve today? So I think the more you sit down with a really clear game plan of not just the order of things you're going to work on and how much time you'll spend on each part, but what about this piece am I going to try to improve today? That on a micro level will make your practice way more efficient. And again, the question was about practicing efficiently. If you're like, I'd probably have a slightly different answer if it was like, how can I enjoy my practice more? But that's what I would say for efficiency. All right, the next question is from Metvuns Jensen 4094. I'm sadly in between teachers right now. I've been playing for the 1.5 years. I'm a lifelong musician, and even pros are amazed by my progress. That's awesome. So far, I've been playing mostly band music for my 2 bands because I needed to learn fast. Now my question, what should I begin with? I'm ready to lose the tapes, and I'm feeling ready to begin playing solo pieces. I would like to hear your suggestions. That's a little open-ended, which is a great thing. I mean, it sounds like you're making great progress. And Matt, I recognize you, so how are you? What I would say to you is, in this case, if you're making a lot of progress and you're enjoying yourself, I think the best thing you could do would be to think about what you see in the immediate future, which is like, say, the next 5 years. What do you want to be doing with the cello? Do you want to be playing sonatas? Do you want to be playing concertos? Do you want to be in orchestral settings? And then figure out what skills would be the most helpful for whatever path you kind of want to carve out for yourself. So for example, let's say you're already in 2 bands. Let's say you want to just be playing in as many groups as possible and meeting people and playing great music and processing a lot of music, because every group you're in is going to have, maybe 4 or 5 pieces per concert, and then suddenly you've got tons of notes. If that's the case, what I would suggest is get a kind of exciting, vigorous scale and arpeggio routine going, because the ability to know your fingerboard inside and out and to call up fingering patterns and arpeggio patterns and recognize them when you're sight reading, that will make the orchestral load of how many pieces you'd have to learn, that'll make that way more manageable, because you're not learning the notes of every piece you're assigned. You're like, got it, okay, this is an E flat major, that's an arpeggio, it's modulating to, then it goes a half step up to E major, and I just plug in this scale, and this little run is taken care of. Okay, instead of like, oh my gosh, okay, now there's 4 sharps, like what do I do here? So the scales and arpeggios would be huge for playing a lot of orchestral stuff. So that's I think that's the best I can do for answering, is just thinking about what you want out of cello, and then thinking of what skills, because there's many things you can practice and many things you can work on. What are the ideal things to create like a smooth and steady path towards your goal? All right, this is from Bernadette Donra B. Congratulations on this milestone. Thank you so much. What advice do you have for keeping one's right shoulder down when practicing? Every time I look in the mirror, I see my shoulder hiking up and corrected, but the correction doesn't seem to stick. Any help you can provide will be greatly appreciated. Okay, hey Bernadette. Okay, so what I would say is a couple things. The first thing is you can check, especially on the A string, a lot of people, even if they have a relatively straight bow, there is a tendency to think a little too much kind of up this way. So like think vertically up as you pull towards the tip on the A string, and not enough kind of out, like over your right foot. So part of it could be adjusting the mechanics of your actual bow stroke on the A string. That happens a lot, and you could have a pretty straight bow, but the less you kind of venture outwards at the end of your bow stroke, the more likely it is that your right shoulder is going to have to lift, because your elbow can only go so high before it's that's your range of motion, and then your shoulder is going to start lifting. One thing I'll also say is that your shoulder can lift at times, like for example at the tip on the A string, or if there's certain times your shoulder lifts, that can be okay as long as it comes back down. I think what happens with a lot of adult learners is we hold tension in our neck like daily stress, and so the minute we bow and the shoulder gets teased up a little bit, it just sort of stays there, and that becomes like the new normal for our practicing, and then suddenly we've been holding our shoulder up higher than we needed to for 5 minutes straight because we just forgot to release it again. So that's one tip. In terms of correcting it and then plugging it in when you're practicing, I think if you're anything like me, you might just not be patient enough with the process. You've built probably a habit at this point, and so you have to undo that habit. The great news is that our bodies love to be comfortable, so in the end, this like lower right shoulder is going to win, okay? Because it's going to be less painful, way more comfortable, okay? But what I would do is, like you said, you look in the mirror, you do your mirror work, and then you start playing a piece, let's say, and you find, oh my gosh, I videotape myself, my shoulder's way up. Well, instead of just running through the piece or practicing it the way you're normally doing, maybe the solution is do your mirror work and then take one bar of the piece. And instead of just plugging in the physical memory you've already built up in that piece, which probably includes that raised shoulder, work on that bar of music and making sure in just one bar you could memorize one bar of music and look in the mirror and make sure that it sounds how you want it to sound and that your right shoulder isn't raised. Then you do another bar, only that bar. Then you do the 2 bars together. Do you see what I'm saying? So you just kind of splice this adjustment slowly into the other things you're playing. And that would be a way to check while you're still practicing, because you're only doing one bar at a time, so you can actually keep looking in the mirror and adjusting. And eventually, like I said, it will win over. So keep fighting, okay? And I'm glad you're taking care of it now, because it can lead to a lot of pain. Okay, this is from Barbara Vanderweel, 8080. Hi Billy, just want to thank you for your inspiration, all the great advice you gave in the videos. It helped me tremendously. When you started this channel, I just returned to the cello after years of neglection. One of the first videos I saw, you talked about your journey and gave me so much motivation to go for it. So I moved the inner critic aside, started practicing and practicing. I worked hard, and now I'm finally at the point that I start to appreciate my own sound. That's awesome. And carefully start to play with confidence. I'm playing with other students in a quartet. The cello brings me so much joy, will continue to. Always like your videos and learn from it. We once met in a Zoom meeting, I actually remember, which was great. Congrats with your milestone. Lovely to see a glimpse of your personal life. Oh, in South Korea. Take care of your shoulder. Good news on the shoulder front, by the way. Things are going beautifully, and I'll probably do a video about it because I had some fascinating discoveries during my time in PT. So, Barbara, yeah, thank you so much for your message, and I totally remember working with you about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now, and I'm thrilled to hear that you're in a quartet. That is like, for me, the number one activity I can do with a cello that brings me complete satisfaction and joy is playing great quartet music with friends and colleagues is wonderful. So congrats on that. That's awesome. Okay, this is from Eleanor Nolan Mills. If you only had 1 hour a week to practice, what would you do in that hour? What's the most important in practice, in your opinion? What a great question. So what I'm going to do is answer for me. But this doesn't mean that's my advice for everyone necessarily, okay? Because I'm at a certain place in my journey. So what I would say is if I only have 1 hour a week, I'm going to work on sound, okay? I'm going to spend at least 5 to 15 minutes just playing, maybe a scale, but maybe just even single notes on single strings, like building sound. It's been a week since I practiced because I'm doing 1 hour a week. So I'm refamiliarizing myself. I'm kind of getting acquainted with the bow arm, how it feels, like how I sink into the string, what's the optimal weight and speed for my placement, just really delving into how rich a sound I can pull out. And then I would probably just move on, if I only have an hour, I just move on to maybe a couple phrases from a couple pieces I already kind of know. So I wouldn't be like learning new music. I would just be, I work on a little bit of the Rachmaninoff vocalese or a little bit of a sonata I've worked on, but just a little bit. And I would try to take that sound then, and since I know the piece, I probably have the phrasing I would want to hear in my head already, and then I want to work on finding that perfect kind of balance between that rich, gorgeous tone, but then also having dynamics and having phrasing that makes the music. So essentially, I'm saying what I want to say, but I'm retaining that beautiful sound. That's what would get me going if I only had an hour a week. Because, what am I going to cram an hour a week of scales and arpeggios? Maybe some weeks I might do that where I just want to like, oof, boy, it's cobwebs in some parts of this cello. Let me just like do, focus on the third octave of a few scales and really get, reoriented with the cello because it's been a week and I only played an hour. But my number one thing would be sound and beauty of sound, and then being able to sculpt the sound with the bow to create the line I want to hear that I already hear in my head. So that's my answer, but that would be for where I am right now, and that's not what I would probably say if I was 2 years into my journey. So I'll leave it at that. Great question. All right, so this is from Lisa Alex Gray. How do you take the leap from good beginner cellist to a higher skill level of sound and performance? I've been learning the cello for about 6 years through different online programs and online lessons. I've had 2 periods where I practiced every day for a year to try and advance my skill level. That's great. I spend about 3 hours a week currently practicing. I still struggle with vibrato, smooth transitions between positions, and playing at the right speed for the piece. Thanks for your advice and congratulations. Thanks so much. So, Lisa, how do you take the leap from good beginner to a higher skill level? I think it's similar to what I said earlier in a question to Janet, I believe. But one thing I love about what your kind of question you wrote to me is that you kind of already know what you're struggling with, and I feel like you're saying, with vibrato, smooth transitions between positions, like shifting and playing at the right tempo, the right speed for the piece. If I had those 3 things, I would be further along. So I think taking the leap is figuring out a way to work on those aspects as effectively as possible. Now, if you had a private teacher, if it were me, and that's how I felt, I would say, here are 3 things I want to start working on. Because sometimes with people and their teachers, they can get kind of passive of like, oh, but I already know I'm supposed to be working on this piece. But if it were me, I would just go into the lesson and be like, here's what I think. I've been thinking about my progress. I need to work on these things. Let's build like a routine or a plan, like a 3 to 6 month plan to get me significantly further in these three areas. And believe it or not, I bet most teachers would appreciate that because it's like, great, I have just the thing for you. This let's get down and dirty in the technique. This is great. So the 3 hours a week practicing, that's plenty of time actually if you're putting in the right kind of practice to make progress. And I think one thing I did by accident was, I talk about this in other videos a lot because it's like one of my biggest, not regrets, but regrets is that early on I substituted amount of hours put in for like quality of work. And I would just put in hours and hours and hours, but looking back, a lot of them were kind of mindless hours. And I also, let me just play that part again because that's the part I play well. And I just want to, God, I love playing cello. I just want to play cello well right now. So it's versus like, okay, let me sit down, eat my vegetables, and work on this shifting exercise that I can kind of get away with, but honestly, it's not. I know it's not as solid as it should be. So that's what I would say is, you have, I would say, find your issues, but you already stated what you think they are. That's great. And then if you have a teacher or you can, through online resources, try to pinpoint ways to work on those areas, and then just sit down and, don't forget to have some fun too. If it's going to bore you to tears to just do like kind of the really difficult work of improving these areas. But yeah, I think with like surgical precision approach on these things, you'll make a lot of progress and it'll feel great. This is from Peg Leg Poker Club. How do I know if a luthier is good or not? Are there any tells or things to look out for? Are violin luthiers also cello luthiers? Okay, great question. So first off, most luthiers that I know of make all types of instruments. There are a handful of luthiers who make like primarily cellos. This cello that I got in Florence from Jamie Lazarus, she's actually a luthier who makes primarily violins and violas, and I had to beg her for 2 years to make a cello, and she did, which I was incredibly thankful for. But yeah, so most luthiers, if they don't specialize in cellos, they have made a cello as part of their training or something. But if you're looking for a cello, to find a luthier who specializes in cellos or makes many cellos is a great thing. I took a gamble because I believe in Jamie, and it totally paid off. But it was a gamble because she doesn't regularly make cellos. Now, how do I know if a luthier is good or not? This is tricky because you could be a very mediocre luthier and have a very flashy website, and you can kind of figure out ways to get quotes from people that it's like you hand them a cello and they're backstage and they play a couple notes and they're like, oh, that's a nice cello, and that says so and so says my cellos are nice, and so they're it's marketing, so you have to be careful with that. What I would do if you are interested in a luthier is look at kind of look at their area and try to find some people who've bought their instruments, and like how are they like respected or not respected by the top players in their area. Okay, so like here in Los Angeles, there's luthiers, and what I would do if I was curious about one is I would try to ask pros and find out like what their opinion is, and ideally in person, because it's like something you'll write in an email. People might be a little more candid in person, but I think word of mouth is from reliable sources is basically going to be the absolute safest bet to find out whether a luthier is good or not. There are luthiers who have like won awards at like the Violin Association, so that would be another way to kind of weed it out. But I just go by word of mouth basically, and I think that's the absolute most solid way to get a feel for how that luthier is perceived by the true connoisseurs and top players. All right, this question is from Joel Hoffman 8277. As I play, tension slowly builds in both my arms. How do we release tension as we play? That's a great question. So that's also interesting because one thing I talk about is how, I've found in my journeys early on, with our hands, if you think about like when we're driving or we're doing like washing dishes, if it's very unusual in our day-to-day life for one hand to be super super tense and the other hand to be completely relaxed. Okay, especially if we're doing something that requires both hands. Okay, so I guess if you're opening a door, you could maybe have one tense hand, one relaxed. But if you're doing something that involves both your hands, that's I think the issue with cello playing is that you start out okay, and then let's say you have a bow grip that is gets kind of grippy and squeezy, and the thumb starts pressing in. That can actually trigger the thumb of the left hand to start gripping as well, because we just do everything kind of synchronized usually with both hands. Okay, so what I would do is try to solve it one hand at a time and then put it together. Okay, so the areas I would look at for tension is bow grip. For the bow arm, I would think bow grip first, and then I would think maybe shoulder, and then also kind of how I'm pulling sound out. Am I pressing sound, like just pressing down to push sound out of the cello? Maybe I can start working on drawing sound out with more of a kind of U-shaped bow stroke. Left hand, I'd say, thumb into the back of the neck. That's a huge one that creates a ton of tension because the thumb starts pushing and then the fingers feel like they have to kind of complete that gripping motion. So that happens. Another thing would be, you can, and then other aspects of cello playing can cause tension. Like, for example, if you feel nervous shifting and you suddenly are playing a piece and you've got to shift back and forth and you haven't really figured out the timings such that you can leave early enough so that you have fluid, smooth shifts, and so you're getting jerky with the left hand, and then suddenly that triggers the right hand, and then both arms get tired. So I would try to pinpoint what in both arms gets tired, try to solve them separately, and then try to put it together slowly and see, like, can I get through this little exercise? Can I get through this 4 bars of music while, not like totally backed off and floppy and like I will not squeeze, not that, but like, let me play, but see if I can get 4 bars with both arms with my newly improved hands, see if I can get them to work together without tension. And then if that happens, stop and congratulate yourself on a win. You don't, it's little step by step with tension, physical tension usually, at least for me. So don't expect like necessarily that you'll conquer it and then now I can play for 2 hours straight and I don't tense up. So it's like little victories will get you a long way. All right, this is Smith Music Studies. My bow arm gets very tired. What are some checkpoints for me to ask myself to make sure my posture is not compromised? Okay, great question. Bow arm gets tired. That can happen from a few things. The most common ones I just actually mentioned in the previous question. If your bow grip is overly tight and the thumb starts pushing into the wood, that's very fatiguing. And then on top of that, it actually makes it harder to sink weight into the string well, and so you end up kind of squeezing the stick more and pressing more because you don't have that kind of supple ability to like sink weight in effectively into the string. So I would check the bow grip. Posture wise, I would check the way I'm sitting. If you find yourself like, some people want the cello kind of to meet them, which is fine, but if you find that you're like leaning back a lot and you're way back here and then you feel kind of like your arm is isolated from the rest of your body when you're bowing, and so it's really truly your arm moving back and forth and there's no like engagement with the back muscles, and you don't have any of your body's weight that you can kind of like help sink in to draw sound out, that would be a great way to get super tired super fast. So I would think of trying to approach the cello with your body, maybe so that instead of like your body's straight and the cello's meeting you, that might work. You could even have your body like more like an A shape, so that it meets the cello kind of a little bit more like leaning forward. That can help a lot actually with being able to sink the weight of the arm to pull sound. That would be the other thing, is just checking to make sure you're not pressing sound at all times, and that you can actually just draw sound with like the natural weight of your arm. You'll find, I think, that if you can master the sort of speed and weight and kind of open sound that way, you actually don't need a ton of muscle, like true muscle power in the arm. Um, and you can get away with just being really efficient with kind of how you're using the weight of this arm instead of just like I need to push more and more to get a bigger sound. I hope that helps. Okay, so this comment is Mufit Kamaram 5908. Thank you for all the information shared since now. Congratulations for the baby. Thank you so much. Get well soon. Thank you. Best wishes. Sincerely. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your support of my channel. All right. And so our final question for this part one is from Christopher White, 2832. My question, how to take a piece you've been working on from say 80% to performance quality. I'm not talking about Rostropovich level, but consistent without mistakes. I seem to get stuck at the 80% point. I can play it all, just not always at the same time. I make mistakes in fingering, bowing, or notes, and then the chance I make more mistakes increases since I'm out of sync. Right, that makes sense. Sure, practice, 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 but maybe there's more methodological. There's a more methodical approach that I'm missing. Okay, so that's a great question, Christopher. And kind of interesting because from what I am reading, it's not about a tempo thing of like I can only play this thing at 80% speed, because that happens too, where it's like how do I get that last 20% that is the right tempo. My solution to this, which it has worked wonders for me the more I do it, is to practice the piece in question at what feels almost like an absurdly slow tempo. Okay. And that gives you the tempo and the time, not the tempo, that gives you the time to really not just focus on what you're doing, because it sounds like you've got every little passage worked out on their own, but now it's like to put it all together. You want to have it so that you're, again, like clearing a path that's a very clear path from start to end. And by doing it playing the whole thing at a very slow tempo, you can completely listen for how the music's going in the current time, the current moment, but then also kind of prepare yourself ahead of time for the next, like bridge to the next piece you worked on. Usually most of us, we pick sections and then we kind of practice a piece in these sections throughout. We don't say like, okay, here's section A, here's B, and now I'm going to do A to B, like that little section, which is actually a great way to practice. But if you kind of just put things piece by piece, you need to practice at a slow enough tempo that you get through A, which will be easy to do because it's very slow, but then you practice that transition into the next practiced section that you've been doing, okay? I find that the slower I practice, that's reasonable for the bow, so it's not like I'm just like completely running out of bow because it's a glacial tempo, but the slower I can do that at a tempo, it almost never fails that the minute I bring the tempo up, the music just flows beautifully because I've taken the time to kind of really reinforce not just the piece, the sections of the piece, but getting from A to B to C to the end. Okay, so that's what I would do. Slow work. And instead of being annoyed like I used to be by having to practice something slow that is already comfortable, this is your chance to listen even more carefully. Like, am I really phrasing things perfectly? Is that exactly how I wanted to hear it? How's my intonation? Like you can always find more and more detail to listen to and listen for so that you don't get bored while practicing that slowly. So there you go. That is part one. Stay tuned next week for part two, and I will be revealing the winner, the person who gets a 60-minute Zoom lesson with me. Thanks so much. See you next week.